beside Dean Detmer. I think he's on the call today as well, at a conference this summer. And he's like, hey, we started this new science class. And it was really pretty exciting to hear him talking about it, just because I know that often we struggle in career tech when we are looking for academics that are a good fit to partner with some of our kiddos that would relate to their lab, that would connect to their labs and make sense. And that's really pretty easy for us to do when it comes to like health careers, sports, fitness, and exercise science, or vet science. You know, that A&P is such a good fit, but we often struggle to find a science offering that might be relevant to our students in auto body, auto collision. And sometimes those kids then get frustrated in the science classes that they end up in and aren't engaged. And so really, when I heard about the science class that Fort County had offered just a little bit in talking to Mr. Detmer, I was like, I really want to see that in action. So that was back in July, and I kind of, had that in the back of my mind that I wanted to go visit them. But then as I got back into SST work in August and September, I kept hearing all about this chronic absenteeism and how schools, as we were getting back to school, especially our larger schools, were really struggling with students coming to school. There's, these frequent absences, and even our career techs were complaining in our larger urbans that, when these kids don't come to school, then they're failing our classes, or if they're failing classes before they even get to us, sometimes they don't get enough credits, and it's not a good fit then because they're not going to be able to graduate if they come to career tech. So even though they should be in career tech, they choose not to. It's this whole idea of they're not coming to school, and that's impacting what's happening with career tech enrollment sometimes. Sometimes students have failed classes before us, and then they get pulled out of career tech classes to make up credits, which that's not a good thing. And on the other data that really has just always kind of broke at my heartstrings is, in Ohio, every year, nearly 4,000 students with disabilities have dropped out of high school every year. Those are kiddos who should be finding their way, right? Who we would like to see gaining skills in their choice of career tech education, but they don't see the relevance in school, right? They don't see the options for them in school. And so they don't even make it to 11th or 12th grade. They're dropping out before they get to us. So all of those thoughts were running through my head. And I kept thinking back to this class, this science class at Fort County, and how they were trying to, right, find that fit and have that relevance and engagement. And then I was at another session, and I was talking to a principal, and he's like, we had this young lady last year. She didn't care. It's sophomore, doesn't care about school at all because she's a social media influencer, legit social media influencer, making $3,000 to $6,000 a month. Right? She's not making a connection between her world and the courses that she's taking. And it just made me think, okay, we really have to start being more intentional about what we're offering, not just in career tech education, but also in our academics, and making sure that those courses are relevant to the lives and the world of the students that we're serving. So this young lady, she's real. You can find her. She's out there. So that principal sent me her information, and she is a true social media influencer. She's making $3,000 to $6,000 a month, and she's really not caring about school, because why should she learn about Shakespeare and the Transcendentalist and maybe even chemistry, right? When she's found her calling, right? She's found, right? If we're not using our English class to talk about persuasion, to talk about communication, then we're missing the boat, right? And then after I saw Mr. Bertot's class, I was reading this book, The Power of Moments. And this quote just really stuck out to me. Even though high school students log more time in the classroom than anywhere else, Their most memorable experiences rarely take place there. What if we could design an academic experience that was as memorable as prom? That stuck with me, and I thought instantly about Mr. Berteau's class that I observed. I'm not sure if he's going to share the lesson that I observed today, so I'm not going to say what it was. He did it, so I will at the end. But what I observed when I watched his class was every student engaged, doing something completely unexpected in his classroom, and I'm sure they will always remember that learning activity, right? That's what we're striving for. That's why I've invited Mr. Berteau to come and talk to you, because we want them actively engaged in all of our classes. It's happening in career tech classes all the time, but we want it happening in all of our classes. So at this point, Tom, do you have slides or things to share with us?
I have stuff on my desk that I'll show, but I don't have slides.
Okay, so I'm going to
So,
stop sharing so that you can
okay.
show those things.
All
But this
right.
is Tom Berteau from Fort County Career Center, and I thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. So the class that we have is material science. It's kind of like a hybrid of a lot of chemistry, some physics, some engineering, all that kind of stuff, all built into one. They have a camp that they offer in like the summertime, and then this is the workbook they give, but I tried to send a link. I think Lisa said she was going to point that out later on. But kind of the way that the class starts, we talk a lot about crystals, and students get to like grow like metal crystals. And the lead into that is that metals are like crystalline kind of things. And we do things like with work hardening. A lot of kids in auto body know, like, oh, if I have a ding in my car and I have to fix that ding, how would I end up fixing that repair? I have to heat it up, but I don't want to leave it hot. I want to cool it off. And one of the labs that we did just a few days ago involved heat treating steel. And we used a very simple steel product. We used bobby pins. So that's one of our first labs we do with heat treating. And I know if you guys know like bobby pins, the standard bobby pin, you pull it, it'll snap back. That's just how they work. One of the experiments we have is students heat the little loop part to rocket hot, red hot, and then they just leave it on the counter. And then that's called the annealing. So it cools down slowly. How will that affect it? I'm trying not to have it slip out of my hand, but you can kind of see it. It doesn't want to snap back anymore. It becomes like a really soft material when you anneal something. It loses like that kind of snap back. Then there's quenching. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about quenching. It's very popular because the kids like dunking and hearing the sound of the hot metal hitting that. Quenching, it's pretty hard. It's got some strength to it, but it should snap in two. It's very strong, but it's very brittle. So if you're trying to like repair a car, you wouldn't want to heat it up really hot and throw water on it. It might look nice, but if you get an accident, the whole thing's going to kind of shatter and explode. And then we talk about tempering, which is a little bit of both. It's the best of both worlds. You heat it up red hot, you quench it, but then you do a gentle reheat again, and then that original like snapback comes back, just like the original one. So that's kind of like our intro to metals, work hardening, all that kind of stuff. But then we also go into like corrosion, and we all deal with corrosion, right? Everybody knows corrosion. You guys know how a car would rust or anything like that? Do you guys know the main thing? Anybody want to unmute themselves? Anybody know the main answer? How do things rust? How do things corrode, I should say?
Oxidation.
Oxidation. Ooh, that's good. That's a good word. That's good. So this is another one of the labs we have. This is just some steel wool. I made this probably about an hour ago, so it's a little bit longer than what it should. This steel just in water. So like when your car gets some rain on it, you might have it out there for a couple of years. It gets rusty even though it's sitting because water can affect and cause iron to corrode and rust. This one here is a little bit different. A lot of times my students tell me it's like water and salt. So we have water and salt here. There's a little bit more rust on the bottom. And the tie into that I like to use is like the Titanic. And it was kind of big a couple years ago when the submarine went down and all that stuff. But the Titanic has been sunk for over 100 years, but it's still there. It's corroding, but it's not fully corroded. I don't know if your cars are like mine. Mine's got some rust on it, and it's not over 100 years old. We're in this Ohio weather. What's causing it? Well, you got the slush, you got the salt on the roads, but you're also driving, so you're getting that extra oxidation. And this one is steel wool with some water, some salt, and we add a little bit of like hydrogen peroxide as our little added oxygen to that. And we talk a lot about corrosion, how to prevent corrosion, like galvanized steels, when you zinc plate it, how that can protect it. There's sacrificial anodes that are used in like your water heaters. So that's tied in any like plumbing students. You might know about like a hot water tank, how you have to put a rod in or we also talk about polymers. I thought I grabbed something for polymers, but I don't have it. We also have a kiln in my room. When we talk about ceramics, the students are able to make really whatever kind of design they want. This is just a bowl that I made a couple years ago. But you take the clay, you can shape it, and then we have the students glaze it with different oxidation so they can get different colors. And the trick with this lab is we open up the kiln while it's like everything is red hot, rocket hot, and we pull it out. We place it into basically a little paint can with some paper in it because we're trying to get it to oxidize and reduce at the same time to give off different types of kind of corrosion at the same time with that. The last one I don't know. I just had this one in my room. I think it's just too cool to pass up. It's something that students really had never seen. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. This is just a basic wire. It's called nitinol. Has anybody ever heard of nitinol before? It's just like a standard black wire. Nothing's really fancy. It can twist up. It can do some interesting things. I guess got it twisted here. Nothing really crazy. But what we can do with it, and this is why I got my goggles here. I got a torch set up if I kind of don't want to roast my hair off here a little bit. Hold on. Get that lit. I got some pliers here. And I'll show you it twisted up one more time. So it kind of looks like that. And all I'm going to do is just heat it up. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but the twisting is it straightens itself out with heat. So nitinol is called like a memory alloy, and that has a lot of tie-ins to even the medical field, like with heart stents. That can be placed inside of your body, and it'll hold open in a certain position. It won't crump because your body is warm enough to make it, stay set in whatever position it would have been in when they first inserted it. But I don't know, it's just too good to pass up. I love nitinol. It's pretty cool. I think that's all I had, though. I don't know if you guys had any questions or anything like that. I thought I'd grab one more thing, but I don't see it anywhere. But yeah, that's all I got.
Why don't you talk about a little more of some more of the topics that you cover throughout the year?
Oh yeah, I can do that. So if you ever have a chance to kind of look at the book link, it kind of breaks it down in here. But there's like main materials we talk about. There's metals, there's ceramics and glass, there's polymers and ceramics, and kind of how that all ties into your everyday world. There's things like cardboard. People throw those away all the time, but cardboard is one of the greatest like composites of all time. It's just paper and glue, and they're sent off, all around the world at all times. When we do our labs, The way that we organize it is kind of by that same setup where we have a metals section, we'll have a ceramics section, a glass section, and the way the class really works for us is we will do a lab and we'll kind of talk about it for a little bit, and then we'll have another lab that kind of ties in and kind of building off of each little topic as we go through it. I know. Did that answer your question, Dean?
Well, I guess the makeup too is that there's a lot more smaller activities. Correct me if I'm wrong. Traditional sciences usually have like one big lab per unit, when I
Oh,
taught
yeah.
physics, but now there's a lot more smaller activities throughout the units.
Yes,
There's
that is very like we're probably averaging around like 2 to 3 activities a week almost. But they're not like overly long like you're saying. They might take like 20 to 25 minutes and we have time to talk about them at the same time. But I know there's a lot of stuff in this class.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you guys do the mastery-based grading on the labs where the kids get a 4 out of 5 if they do it right and then a 5 out of 5 if they show a friend?
No, well, the way that I do it right now is I'm just doing like assigned points if they do the lab. That might be something that we can look into the future on. Last year we were really just trying to keep our head above water a little bit, but that could be something that I look into in the future for sure. But yeah.
And just to clarify, sir, what's the name of this class that you're doing all this stuff in?
It's material science, and it's ASM is the I'll kind of show the book here up close so I don't see my face. ASM material science. It was really big in like the West Coast for a while, like Oregon really dominated, and now it's more like Ohio is taking over. Like we visited a career center. Dean, we did that. What it was like 2019, maybe.
Yeah.
When I went to the camp over the summer, the guy who ran it was probably the best in, I want to say, the country. It was unbelievable how good this guy was. He was in Tolles Career Center, kind of by like Columbus. So it's definitely more, I think, a perfect fit for a career center because you have so many different things going on. But if you're in, any kind of school could do it, but I think career center for sure, it's kind of a must, I think, even just to try it out for like a semester or something, or even if you wanted to get a few labs out of the book, if you don't want to dive fully into the class, just bring in some of those things. I've used a lot of those in my chemistry class too as supplemental for different types of experiments.
And this class does cover then obviously the content standards for the grade level content standards for standard science.
Yes.
It's we considered a high level chemistry course is how we code it. So it's a high level. We also like to keep it quiet from our associate schools because we don't want them teaching it. We want to be a little bit selfish with it, I guess, because it's such a cool science course and they put a lot of time and effort into it. I have 3 teachers teaching it now. So the amount of time they put into it is incredible. They've really taken off with it. They're really enthused about it. And I'd hate to have, as much as I want all students to have this kind of experience, I really don't want our incoming juniors to have already taken this class because we put so much time into it. I know it sounds kind of selfish, but we really want to keep it a higher level math science course. So
And Dean, I think that's an important point, and that's the importance of communicating with our schools and letting them know, hey, if you're going to be in such and such and such a program, we really want you in the material science class.
Yeah.
Right. That's a class that is recommended or required if you're here. So when you come for an 8th grade visit, we want to make sure that we're sharing that information. So if by chance that is offered at your school, don't take it because you're going to take it here.
Right.
Or take it, junior, senior year or something like that. It's a higher level. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. That's important information that it's important for career techs to share. When you have an aligned academic, it's important that we share that information so that students and parents are knowledgeable of that.
The one thing that I'll add really quickly with it, and I know it's only our second year doing it, but I think we're doing it okay. But we're only just like scratching the surface. I know, like tolls, for example, just because I emailed that guy a lot last year, they have like 2 full years of it. So like, there's even more that we could like dive into. Further labs, further, deep dives of why this might be happening, where there might be some meat left on the bone when we're doing it, but, we're trying to get through it the best that we can and making it not only entertaining, but also tying in that stuff to their labs at the same time.
So I would like to jump in real quick because I know Dean mentioned we count this as like a high level chemistry or like an advanced science, but like also keep in mind we have students of all types from all labs in there. I mean, we do target a lot of like our hands IEPs, it doesn't matter. Like they're being very successful with the curriculum they are. And we not only attribute it to like the science teachers and how much they're putting in to the preparation and the work, but also just the makeup of the lab. It's more hands-on, like they're able to connect and make deeper connections with what's being taught and applying those to their lab. The other thing, Dean and I worked on and work with the science teachers on, we capped that class at 22. We try to keep it smaller for a reason due to how much hands-on and safety and things along those lines, but it also gives them smaller groups to work with and more connections to be made. And Dean might talk about it too. When we started this, I think we offered 6 sections, had a quest, and now I think we're up to and possibly potentially more.
Yeah, right now I know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like I think it's kind of like the science of the future myself, because it does tie into like everything we want to be. Like, how do I stop cars from rusting? How can I build this building with a better material that might be cost effective, lightweight, but strong and tough at the same time? But yeah, I don't know. That's just but I teach a class, so I already love it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. And I just want to share the lesson that I observed. It was a more simple, he didn't have anything fire, nothing, blowing up or anything. But students, I walked in and at his desk was this large container of pencils. And in my mind, at first I was like, oh, Mr. Berteau, I'm so proud of you. You've got all these pencils in case a kid needs a pencil. You're prepared. They're ready. No, that's not what those pencils were for. So the assignment was every kid got a pencil and they were to tear that pencil apart, like figuring out what materials were used to create this pencil. He wanted to see like the graphite, the pencil lead, right?
Yes.
Who could tear that pencil apart, but preserve the longest piece of graphite from it? Like it was an awesome start of, a lesson wherever he was going with that. There was a day 2 to it and I only saw the day 1, but every kid was, engaged in figuring out how to tear apart that pencil. They were talking to their neighbor. They were, really looking at what everybody else was doing and trying to one up the other kid. It was fantastic because they were actively engaged, every student. So even with a simple pencil, right? Like it was fantastic. So well done, Fort County. Fantastic in finding a science class for those kiddos that, you had a gap area. You knew there was a gap where we hadn't found the right fit and you found it. So very cool. And I'm glad that you were able to share with us today. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to our next presenter?
Thank you for letting me speak with you guys today.
Thank you, Mr. Berteau. Hopefully you like my little thank you card chosen just for Mr. Berteau. All right, moving on to, before we move on to Chelsea, I did find this graphic. I was at the Aim Higher conference just a few weeks ago, and this just made me think about it, right? Like we need to level up. We need to do what Fort County has done. We need to find the relevancy in all of our classes, right? Our English classes, where can we start to tweak them just a little? Our science classes, where are we finding relevancy? Who's in them? Are we tailoring that topic to the kinds of students who are in those rooms, right? So just being more intentional and thinking about all of this, right? That there are all of these levels, and where are we getting our kids to? I'm going to introduce Chelsea Canterbury. I'm sure most of you on the call today know Chelsea. She's been with us from the Department of Education and Workforce, Department of Education and Workforce. Chelsea Canterbury is the Perkins Special Populations Administrator, and she unfortunately was not able to join us at our last session, and we were able to squeeze her in to this session. So Chelsea, I thank you for joining us. I'm going to make you a co-host. Find you.
Well, Lisa, it was meant to be that I was on this particular month's call. I was getting emotional when Mr. Berteau was talking. I actually co-taught for 3 years with that teacher from Tolles that he was talking about. Todd Bollenbaugh is my very good friend. So if anybody wants his contact information to learn more about ASM, he is at Marysville Local Schools now. So I'm happy to give everybody that information because you won't be able to find him at Tolles as a school year.
All right. Well, Chelsea,
amazing curriculum ever, and I love it.
Chelsea, I have made you a co-host, so you are actually, you're the host. It wouldn't let me make you co. So you'll have to hand that back over at the end of your presentation. But
you got it.
The screen is all yours.
All right, I'm going to do the fancy share a piece of a screen here. I'm going to do this guy. And I'm hoping if I zoom, oh, nope, not like that. Let me see if I hit this guy. Is everybody seeing the slides and just a slide?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. If I couldn't see you because I'm looking at the slides. So again, thank you, Lisa, so much for having me here today. I am the incoming Methods of Administration Coordinator, which is essentially the person who does civil rights reviews in the Office of Career Technical Education, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. I am learning from the fabulous Becky Krantz, who is our current Method of Administration Coordinator, and we are currently going through our 22-23 reviews, and in the spring we will be starting our 23-24 reviews. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about what the Methods of Administration Plan is, where it comes from, what it means if you're selected for a Methods of Administration review, and then how this information applies to anyone who offers any career tech at all. Everything in the Methods of Administration program comes from what we call the 1979 Vocational Guidelines. And here's where that came from. In 1974, which is, not recently, it's been a while, but in 1974, there was an injunction before the Supreme Court called Adams versus Califano, where the argument was that vocational education, or what we now call career technical education, was discriminatory against special population groups. 5 years later, after 1974, when the injunction was issued, the finding was that yes, indeed, CTE has been discriminatory against special population groups, and therefore we have the 1979 guidelines, which established the Methods of Administration program. The purpose of the Methods of Administration program is to ensure that all people who are all entities and educational institutions that are offering CTE or vocational education are following all of these civil rights guidelines. So Title VI, Title IX, Title II, 504, and then also the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. With Obviously, we're looking at civil rights issues. We're looking at potential discrimination issues across areas of race, gender, and disability status. We're also looking at discrimination and the way that employees are feeling as they are in an institution that is offering CTE. To be potentially selected for a review is that you have to offer any CTE program and get any federal funding. If you are a school in the state of Ohio that offers CTE, you are also receiving federal funding, and therefore any one entity could possibly be selected for an MOA review. All the things that we cover in an MOA review are also applicable across every other area of public education. It's just that the MOA program only exists for CTE because of those 1979 guidelines. In any other case, everyone is still expected to follow all of these same legislations and civil rights guidelines. It's just that CTE has an extra layer of protection because of that historical disproportionality in access and enrollment. Does anybody have, and I'm going to have to make my screen small here. Does anybody have a question so that I can kind of see?
Kelsey, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Katie Height from Ohio Virtual Academy's Career Tech program. When you say like randomly selected, this is a I guess a volunteer participation. Is that correct, or can you clarify?
That is a really great question, and I'm going to talk about that right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's not random. It's actually rather intentional. What we do in the Office of CTE is we look at all EMIS data pulled from career technical planning districts, and then also we are responsible for looking at the higher education side because they also receive Perkins funds. And basically that's sort of our pool is if you get Perkins money, we know that's the federal money you're getting for sure. You fall under our umbrella of being able to be eligible for being pulled for a review. We look at all of that EMIS data, and what we do on the secondary side, because is we look at minorities, gender, and students with disabilities, and we compare the overall population of the entire service area to those students who are also enrolled in career technical education. There's a second level in secondary where we look at also the building level, and I'll get to that in a second. I know we have some post-secondary friends on the call. We use the same criteria, minorities, gender, and student with disabilities, compared to the overall enrollment at the institution. And then what we do is we really do like a risk assessment score by looking at the disproportionate percentage, like I'm going to get mathy and say the absolute value of the difference between the overall enrollment and how many kids are in CTE to create like a point system and a point value that establishes sort of the risk level of that particular entity as a whole organization and a service level, a service area. And then also for secondary, we're going to pick the top 2 career technical planning districts in the state. So the 2 CTPDs of the 91 that currently exist that are the most disproportionate, that's where we're going to go. If you've been selected for a review in the last 5 years, you are off the list. But chances are that we already have some ongoing technical assistance. If you've been selected in the last 5 years, you've also made those corrections that were recommendations. So from there, we'll kind of, you could come back in 5 years, but we won't be knocking on your door. And then in post-secondary, we're going to look at whatever that first most disproportionate institution is. So on the secondary level, we're looking at every building location in that whole career technical planning district. If the CTPD has the highest level of potential risk, not to say that anyone has done anything wrong, not to say that disproportionality isn't just automatically going to exist because of the population that you're serving. It is just a risk assessment and an opportunity for technical assistance. We select those 2 top CTPDs, and then from those, we choose the top 3 buildings. We will look at the overall district, the local district level data, and how that compares to the students enrolled in career technical education. These are not made public. Nobody is ever going to publish or make a report about which CTPDs were selected in which year. That's always something that's going to be handled internally. It's an opportunity for us as the state to offer that assistance to our CTPDs and our service delivery areas to make sure that we are following civil rights guidelines and that we're preventing you from getting sued. It's our job to help you and offer that support to make sure that everything is in order and there's no potential for people to view something as discriminatory. And I'm going to pause there for a second and see if anybody has a question about that before I talk about the numbers. Okay.
Chelsea, if I could just chime in and just say that for me as a CTPD consultant with the state support team, I see my work with the CTE self-review as a huge help to districts to be able to work through possibly some issues so that they don't end up having to go with you through a
Yes,
real right? Like if we can find something beforehand so that they don't have a corrective action plan with the monitoring process, like that's our job, is to like be preventative.
Absolutely, Lisa, exactly. So the idea is to mitigate that risk. We're going to make sure that we have all of the pieces in place that I'll talk about in a second, that what we really look at when we go in for a review. So in an example school or career technical planning district, it's the same score for gender minority and students with disabilities until you get to like the upper levels and the upper ranges. In this example, this career technical planning district had a difference of between 6 and 10% in their students who fell into that minority group category or non-white students. They had a 3-point gap, or between 11 and 20 percentage points for gender, and then 1 point for students with disabilities, which means they only had a 0 to 5% range of difference between their overall enrollment and the students that are in career technical education. So we would do this first at the career technical planning district level, where we look at the entire service area. Right now, the plan looks at every student in grades 9 through 12 in the service area. And then for CTE, we're looking at students in workforce development courses. That doesn't mean that those things may not change in the future. We have the opportunity to update the plan every year just based on the need of what we're seeing in the state. But for this year, that's what we're looking at, is students in our VT or workforce development courses. So in this example, in the CTPD, you'll see that percentage difference. This was the last one that we looked at. 6.4% of difference, when in the career technical planning district, we have 12.7% of students being non-white, but in career technical education, we would only have 6.3% of students being non-white. Therefore, it's a 6.4% difference, assigning 2 points, etc. for the rest of the categories. So once we've done that risk assessment for the career technical planning district, we would also look at all of the schools and districts at the building level where career technical education is offered and do that same comparison. What we see is that more often than not, our CTPDs that are pulling higher numbers are going to have schools that are pulling higher numbers. It's going to be very unusual for all of the schools to be really proportionate and then the overall CTPD to be disproportionate, though it can happen if CTE is offered in only a few select places. That's something else for career technical planning district leads to consider, is that if you have a diverse population in your service area of the CTPD, we have to be making sure that every student is having that equal access to CTE, and we're supporting those local districts in also offering programming. So the actual process looks complicated, but it isn't. we call you up, we let you know, hey, you were at the top of our list, let's have a chat. The Career Technical Planning District, whoever is the lead, will choose what they call a local coordinator, and that'll be the person that everything comes to and from. We love all of you very much, but when we get 15 different emails from 15 different places all about the same thing, we don't want any wires to get crossed, and we want to make sure that all of the information stays consistent. So we have one person designated as that local coordinator to do the communication and compiling of all of the evidence, and do that correspondence with us. We will have a virtual orientation. Basically, it's this presentation where we talk about what it is and how it works. There are elements that are submitted in a desk review. We also come and do an on-site review. I'll talk about those in a second. We would then come and deliver a letter of finding based on the evidence that was submitted or what we found on the on-site review. Similar to an IDEA selective review or special education selective review, only this time it's a voluntary compliance plan as opposed to a corrective action plan, based on the letter of finding. These are the things to remedy these issues that you found in civil rights violations or ADA violations. And once all of those things are complete, again, you have 24 months to complete those, the potential findings that we have to make those corrections. 2 years is a really long time. Usually we can wrap things up much sooner than that. We also want to be flexible and let people know that if you need more time for whatever reason, let's say funding is too tight for us to make some of these corrections right now, or we can't bring in the staffing to fix this potential issue. It's something that we're able to be flexible with as long as you are communicating with us. And then we can wrap it all up and put it in the books and put it behind us. When we are coming in for an investigation, when the Career Technical Planning District has been selected as one of those that are potentially of highest risk, we look at these 7 areas: recruitment, admissions, counseling, services to students with disabilities, accessibility, work study, or work-based learning in this point, and then employment, which is really the employment situation of the people who are working in the district and in the facility. The first 4 things on this area of investigation are also covered in the self-review tool. So it's an incredible opportunity to work with Lisa and your CTPD consultant to take a look at what are the areas that we may need extra support so that we make sure that we do have proportionate enrollment. And that enrollment can be higher or lower. I love the fact that so many, I have to make it smaller so I can see all of you. I love the fact that so many of our career centers are serving more students with disabilities than the traditional school districts. It's amazing because we know that it's an indicator of post-secondary success. But, oh, what's up, Lisa?
Your slides are not advancing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know. I shrunk it just for a second to talk. Thank you.
There we go.
I just want to make sure I could see everybody because I can't do both at the same time. So I know that a lot of our career centers are serving a disproportionately large number of students with disabilities. Nobody is ever going to tell you that that is wrong or that we shouldn't continue to do that. What may be happening, though, is that there could be some hearing that occurred or even just understanding of the old mentality that CTE is for those kids. And we have to work together to collaborate on how do we, number one, expand CTE so it's for every kid and not just for a certain population of kids, but also to help our schools understand that any student can be successful here. And we shouldn't be steering specific students into either specific labs or specific career pathways because every student should be individualized. There's going to be a huge push here in the next 2 years, friends, for some meaningful graduation planning and pathways planning. You guys are going to be the experts in that space, and it's going to be even more important for our students with disabilities and their transition plans and what that looks like moving forward. We have to continue making sure that every kiddo has that same and equal access. Lisa, I'm going to pause because I can see that you want to say something and I love it. No?
It was just like, I keep hearing that, intentional, meaningful, aligned. I hope people are listening to that. And I'm not sure it's the people on this Zoom call that need to hear it, but I think the people on this call need to be sharing that message with
Absolutely.
everyone that they work with, right? With all of their partner schools, their comprehensives. Make sure your ISs know it. Make sure your transition coordinators know it. Make sure your counselors and principals know it. Like, meaningful graduation and pathway planning, that needs to be a constant message.
Absolutely, 100%. And I agree with you, Lisa. I think a lot of the people on this call are already doing that awesome work. And I'm lucky to have those friends that are able to push that message forward to all of our partner schools so we can help do better things for more kids.
And I will jump in real quick, Chelsea and Lisa, too.
Yeah,
As a non-directly CTE related person, I can tell you that, again, your voices as CTE people to our non-CTE friends in that discussion, and the way Chelsea's saying this is going to be very, very crucial. They need to hear it from you too, that about the meaningful pathways forward and things like that. So just, I know we, and Lisa and I talk about this a lot. When you live in it, I think sometimes it's easy to take it for granted, but I promise you, a lot of your partner schools who are not as connected to the CT world need to hear this from you. They need to hear it. They need to hear from many, many, many sources over and over and over again. So I would just encourage you to really, I think there's a great soundbite, for lack of a better word, Chelsea, that just promote that out there and promote that out there. And the more people they hear it from, the easier it's going to get for everybody.
You're absolutely right, Aaron. And everybody on this call already is the expert. So you guys are the ones that people are going to come running to when all of this becomes even more important and or mandated and or, whatever it is that's coming down the pike. But truly, if we're all in it to make sure every student is successful, including those who are most at risk, we're all going to be on the winning team. And that's exciting.
Chelsea, I have a question.
Please.
Sorry, this is Katie Hyde again from OHVA. So I'm just looking at the language. So investigation, right? I think language matters. So not an audit, but investigation. So the methods of administration, what is their plan then for those that are not in compliant post 24 months?
I have that slide too. Kate, you are all over it today.
I'm sorry. I
love it.
Taking notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I will talk about the sanctions policy here in a minute. I will say what takes us the longest amount of time is reviewing all of the documentation and then also the on-site review. So there is, let's see, one of our reviews that we did here just a few weeks ago, whose name I will never say, so don't ask, because it doesn't matter. We're offering support to every kid. I think they submitted about 500 pages of evidence. I don't know that they needed that much. That was just sort of the way that they chose to submit it. We'll ask for things like copies of board policy, copies of your non-discrimination statement that you have in the district. Who is your Title IX and your 504 coordinator? Do you know what your school policy is with Title IX, or if a student comes to you with a Title IX investigation? What does your service to English learner students look like? We need to see evidence of all of these things in writing, including what that admission policy looks like. And we'll be taking a look at that work-based learning data to make sure that it does appear as though students have equitable access to those work-based learning opportunities. Again, offering some technical assistance or support in that area. And then when we come for the on-site review, my favorite part is we get to sit down at each one of the buildings. So we'll select 3 buildings in the Career Technical Planning District. We'll have a little interview with some administrators, a group of counselors, a group of teachers, and a group of students, all about what their experience is like in the building with CTE with potential discrimination, and then we're able to use that evidence as part of maybe recommendations or potential findings of what areas may need some additional support moving forward. The other piece, and where we actually have the majority of our findings, is we do an ADA walkthrough of the building. We take 800 pictures of things that we see that might potentially be an ADA violation. And then we come back to Columbus and we do a whole bunch of research based on when your building was built, if and when you had any additions or modifications to the building, because something that I just learned is when you do have modifications or additions to a building, 20% of that budget needs to go to ADA improvements in the other parts of the building. We look at things like, are pipes wrapped on the bottom of sinks so that should a person in a wheelchair roll up to a sink, they wouldn't potentially get burned by scalding water if they couldn't feel with their legs. That's one of the biggest things that we find, especially in school buildings. Things like heights of water fountains or the accessibility of the water fountains. Accessible restrooms has been a really big theme. If there's a sink in a lab space, at least one of the sinks has to be accessible so that a student with any kind of physical disability could still access it easily. Especially in older buildings, we're also seeing things like doorknobs. We have the turn knobs that are the little the spheres. Those are really hard to manipulate for people with manual dexterity issues or other physical impairment. So that would be a finding that then you would have 24 months to correct. The other thing I would say, the last thing that we see often is in the parking lot, maybe there's not sufficient striping for a walkway from your accessible parking to the building. And if it takes you until next summer to be able to paint that parking lot because you've got students coming in and out all the time, or your maintenance people don't have the time to do it while school's in session because they're too busy trying to keep the labs running, totally fine. So we can be really flexible also on that timeline. Also, the CTPD sets the timeline for themselves in that voluntary compliance plan. Katie, should any of the pieces be more than 30 days late, we would put a hold on Perkins funding. Remember that when we make the announcement or like the identification, we will go directly to the Career Technical Planning District lead, and then they are the ones responsible for communicating with us. So Perkins funding would be the first sort of level that we would go to that directly affects that CTPD lead. More than 60 days late would be a hold on Perkins funding, and all CTE 26 applications would be put on hold for the entire Career Technical Planning District. Should you be more than 90 days late on any of these pieces, and this is not 90 days late because you can't get it done in 90 days. This is 90 days late because you ghosted us and you're not giving us any feedback or communication. Then we would do all the things in step 2, as well as refer to the Office of Civil Rights. Historically, no one has ever had to go through the sanctions policy. We are in a situation right now with a school where we're getting pretty close to having to apply the sanctions policy just because they're not communicating with us and they're not asking for an extension, and we're just there. I wish that it wasn't that way. But they also had a lot of things that they needed to adjust in their own, in their plan that maybe is taking them some more time. But we're hopeful that they're going to get back to us here, that we're on a timeline and it's ticking. Because we just want to work with everybody. We want to make sure that this is a process that doesn't feel punitive, that does just feel like it is technical assistance and support. It gives you a direct through line to anybody in the Office of CTE that you want to talk to. By having Becky and me, you get access to anybody that you possibly could ever want. So the most important takeaways from today is the understanding that the 1979 federal guidelines talk about every student in CTE, that there cannot be any barriers to participate that have the effect of disproportionality. If we show up at your door or give you a call, it's because disproportionality exists. which means that there's probably an issue somewhere in your either admission criteria or in the steering practices at your partner schools or in some counseling issues or marketing. How can we work together to make sure that we can, as closely as possible, eliminate any of that disproportionality? We could get there and realize the disproportionality exists even though they're doing everything right. We still all have that capacity to do continuous improvement, which is what we're going to talk about at our equity lab tomorrow, Northwest. If you want to come, we're at Bowling Green ESC. And then lastly, they are not directly linked, but they are most certainly aligned, is that the legislation in Perkins 5 does definitely talk specifically to how we can continuously improve outcomes and access for students in special population groups, which of course includes our students with disabilities as our second highest, economically disadvantaged being the first highest. In case you weren't convinced yet, OAC also backs this up to say that we will in Ohio meet those same federal requirements in regard to access, non-discrimination, and performance for special populations in CTE and academic courses.
Chelsea, I have some questions.
Please.
Yes, sorry, Lisa and team. A few questions here and a few comments. First and foremost, how is the part of the review process? Here's the thing, is our CTPDs have virtual schools under their umbrella. How will the audits be taking place virtually to accommodate those schools? Secondly, my biggest concern, and maybe this was covered, and if not, we can take this offline. It's some of us, right, are held ransom. I'll use language because language matters. Ransom by our CTPDs. No, we do not have access to funding, right? And so that will then affect those who fall under those CTPDs. Now, of course, no nameless here, but may not need support with CT26s, running our own CTE programs, but funding is sure tied, right? But yet we don't receive funds. So I just want to make sure that there's some other perspectives in looking at how this will then trickle down to those who are under the support of that CTPD. Am I missing something that was not stated or that I not hear?
No, I don't think so. I think that the biggest picture is that firstly, we look at that overall service area. So it would be your students as well as any other student that would fall into that whole big giant service area that would go into, determining whether or not disproportionality existed. It is very possible that your district location would not then also come up under the review because there isn't sufficient disproportionality. Should it come up under the review, absolutely we are able to make accommodations for a virtual environment. We don't have to do a ADA walkthrough if students aren't in a brick and mortar building. But we would ask questions about supports to English learners. We would ask questions about language translation services, or what do you do for students who are visual or hearing impaired? Those kinds of things would definitely still come under the review. Any corrections that needed to be made would still be essentially on your district to do as an individual district, and then you would just communicate those corrections up through the CTPD lead. So can you tell me what I'm not understanding or what I did not answer for you?
Well, I guess my question maybe didn't, and maybe I didn't ask it correctly, but our CTPD receives their budget based upon, not budget, but our full-time, our FTE equivalency, our career readiness exploration funding. If they are out of compliance, right, those monies will be withheld from them, therefore being withheld to.
So the only things that would be withheld in the sanctions policy would be the Perkins funding,
right?
Which in most cases only goes to the CTPD lead. Perkins funds are very separate from all of those other funding sources that you're talking about. It's just one lump sum that's based on economic need and population of the service area.
So the Perkins Fund, right? So yeah, Perkins. So that will then be according to the 30, well, I guess it'd be the 60-day and the 90-day policy they're out.
Yeah.
So if that CTPD is out of compliance, then those monies will get withheld, and then their umbrella schools, those funds will then.
So let me chime in here because
Yes, please.
Chelsea, the money is not withheld until they actively do not make
Right.
any corrections.
Correct.
So it's
right. Yeah. The sanctions. This isn't
a very few and far between situation. I would say that anybody just completely decides not to do any communication with the Department of Education and Workforce. But I think to answer your question, Katie, is that it's not all CTE funding that we're talking about. It is just a very small portion of Perkins funding, which depending on the arrangement in the CTPD, sometimes is dispersed and sometimes is located only with the lead district to do whatever it is that the lead district says that they're going to do with that money. So all of the other funding pieces do not stop.
So in your, I guess this is my last question, I apologize, but in the MOA plan, do the CTPD, do they create their own committee? I mean, what is the regulation on the committee that will then be a part of this investigation?
So the lead chooses one local coordinator.
Okay.
The only person in charge of the investigation is me.
Right. Right.
So
my question is, does that have to be an employee of that CTPD, or can it be from any of the schools that feed into?
The lead will be sort of our primary point of contact.
Okay.
In a lot of other cases, we're still going to be communicating with the other schools that are part of the review. So we go to maybe we go to visit the lead district at whatever their school is, but then we would also go to visit 2 other locations. In your case, your virtual location, and then any other one location that was highest on that risk assessment scale. We deal with those people directly. When we're doing those reviews, we're talking to whatever leadership wants to be involved in the review at the local level. We welcome that. In a traditional sense, we would walk around with a principal or a maintenance supervisor or somebody that has all the keys. And we say, hey, talk to us about what this room is. And we only look at the spaces used for career tech. Again, wouldn't necessarily apply to all of your settings, but you get to choose who is in that administrative interview. You select those students that are part of the student interview. It's all about just making sure that we have as objective a picture as possible without coming into it with any sort of preconceived notions or evidence other than, hey, numbers look wonky. Wonder why the numbers look wonky. From a place of curiosity.
See, I have a question because I think I heard you say worst case scenario, if a school or one of their buildings doesn't play ball, they refuse to engage or they refuse to make any of the corrections, you would hold that Perkins funding, but they would also put their CTE 26s for the entire CTPD on hold.
That would be new applications for CTE 26s.
New applications.
So step 1 is Perkins funding, which we know is, compared to all of the other CTE money, Perkins funding is a pittance, and we're acknowledging that. Then step 2 is the 60 days, which is new application. So no new programming would be approved moving forward.
Yep.
And then step 3 is where we just say, sorry, we gave you every chance we possibly could. And we just have to kind of kick it up to the fence. But never our intention. We want to work together. I don't think anybody doesn't want to work with me. I'm not that hard to work with.
So I guess my last question, but then my follow-up question would be, in this worst case scenario of a CTPD not being compliant, not communicating, you use the term ghosting, right? They're past those 90 days.
Sure.
What is the plan for those students that will be affected? How will the MOA then support those students, or what is the plan in place for those?
The only thing that would potentially affect the students would be the inability to start new programming. Everything else should be able to continue as normal, with the exception of, hey, we know that there are some significant violations of civil rights here, and when the feds do come in, you're gonna have to make corrections. So probably time to start making fixes now that we talked about when we came in 60 days, 90 days, 180 days ago. Kids shouldn't be affected by it. It would just be sort of adult behavior and pressure, and then changes that would happen for the benefit of kids.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Chelsea. It's a lot to take in, right? And the reality is probably at some point your career tech will go through one of these. I know in my time in career tech, I have seen at least 3 of these districts that are on the call that have gone through it in the 20 years that I have been in career tech. So it happens, right? It's just how those numbers play out. And I also think there will always be findings. It might be 5 findings, it might be 35 findings, but there's always findings, and that's okay. It just gives us an opportunity, as Chelsea said, to improve, to make things better. So Chelsea, thank you for coming today. Thank you for sharing this information with us. I think it's good for us to always be mindful that methods of administrations exist, and that we want to be doing our due diligence to be looking at our data and our numbers and paying attention to that kind of stuff.
And doing that self-review tool.
Yes. Yes. So I'm going to keep going. I'll go through this quickly. If you need to leave, I understand, but I will finish for those of you who have the time. Do we have any questions from the group about anything CTE related? Okay. Then I'm going to share a couple of things. Dan Heath, who he's the book that I shared earlier. He's the author of that book about the moments. He has a new book coming out called Reset, and I happened to have the chance to see a session of his, and I liked this image. And so what he says is, you know, we have all that's required, right? So think of like science of reading, right? Or even the career advising policy. What's being required? And of that, if we look at, okay, what do we think is the good stuff out of it? So if we take the good stuff and put it over here, and then we say, okay, well, we acknowledge these are the good parts of it. So where can we start? And that's what we put here, right? So sometimes we don't have to eat the whole elephant. We need to embrace it because some of these things are law. But it may help us to make movement if we use this graphic to help us get started. What's all the requirements? What do we see as what's valued? And where can we get started with what's required of what we like? So start with what we like and what we see value in. And then Daniel Pink, some of you may have read his book Outliers. I saw a video recently, and I've linked these two for you here. He has a Pink cast, which are these 3 to 5 minute little videos. One of the videos that I watched talked about the difference between soldiers and scouts. And I just encourage all of us, as we are brought up with new things to consider, maybe as we're asked to be critical of some of our data, maybe if you're going to the equity lab tomorrow, to be scouts, right? To explore, to ask questions, not soldiers, right? When you're soldiers, you defend that position. You want to fight back and say, well, no, this is not how it is. But instead, ask questions. Try to get to the root cause or the deeper meaning. So there are some videos there if you're interested and want to take a look at those videos. And then some upcoming trainings. We do have the statewide Special Ed Leaders Network happening in February. This is the link for that. There will also be an in-person one in February at Vanguard. So there's a virtual statewide and an in-person regional, both of those taking place in February. For Tech Prep, as Chelsea said, we have the Equity Lab workshop happening tomorrow. That is happening at the Wood County ESC. I'm assuming people can still register, but if not, if you're not registered and now you're thinking, maybe I should be at that session, please email Chelsea and see if she can get you to be registered for that if you're not able to use that link to register. Tech Prep, go ahead, Chelsea.
We have plenty of space left.
Yes. So please consider, if you're not registered, please consider registering yourself and bringing a team of 2 to 5. Definitely 2 heads are better than 1. So it's always better to have a couple of people to talk through that data with. And then Tech Prep also will have several CTE 26 workshops happening. That link right here will take you to all of those dates and registrations. National ACTE, you can still register for that. The discount rate is now passed, but you can still register for National ACTE. It is in San Antonio, December 4th through the 7th. Thank you for joining us today. We did go over by about 15-20 minutes, so I appreciate those of you who have stayed with us. Please take the time to either use this QR code and give us some feedback, or if you could, I'll put that link in the chat again and fill out the feedback for us. I'll also put the link to the slides in the chat for you. But with that, I thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found value in both of our presenters. And I look forward to seeing you again on January 15th, where Tech Prep will talk with us a little bit about the work that they have coming up. Thank you, everyone. Putting that feedback link in the chat in case you need it.
Put the evaluation chat. Oh, you got it there. Okay.
Yep. So in the chat now, you should be able to see the link to our Google Slides from today, and then also to the feedback form. Chelsea, are you okay if I share your slides, or are those not shareable? I can share those. Okay. I will send those out as well then. Those are not Google, so I can't just drop those in, but I will send them out in the S'more.